Welcome to the Agile Localization Podcast by Crowdin, where we unpack the strategies and solutions that make localization fast, scalable, and efficient. I'm your host, Stefan Huyghe. Good morning from sunny Texas. Guess what? It's sunny again in Texas. This is almost verbatim the start of every podcast for Crowdin. I do believe it or not, we're here with the great Andy Andersen, Growth Product Manager of International Expansion. That's a mouthful, Andy. That's your title, and I probably don't do it justice. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself a little bit better?
Yeah, thanks, Stefan. It's great to be here. My name is Andy. I've been in the localization industry for a little bit over 10 years now. I have some working experience on both the LSP side and then a lot on the tech side of product, working with, spent about 5.5 years at Tinder, working with Match Group and a few other companies under the portfolio. And then I've worked with a few startups since then, here and there. I've been at Brave for about 2 years now. I specialize basically in helping companies to not only build their international growth kind of flywheel for product, but also helping them to scale and build sustainable programs across both the localization and acquisition channels such as App Store, search engine, all of that. So it's kind of where my specialty lies.
You're a techie, and I like that aspect very much of your experience. So let's dive into some AI-driven localization workflows right away and explore how you're integrating those into your process. How you're incorporating AI tools and Crowdin's AI assistant in particular to accelerate workflows at Brave right now.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I imagine that everyone's got this topic on the top of their agenda these days, especially given the amount of discussion that's been had in the last few years over LLMs and what they can offer. I think we have really been experimenting a lot with our content, different streams of content, and I think the real thing that's been really interesting for us is actually honing in on our prompts and also just making sure that we have the AI model appropriate to each type of content that we're using. I think there's a tendency, it's not just an on and off switch, I guess is what I'm getting at. I think we've really tried to integrate it, but strategically in a way that it makes sense, because there's definitely content where, we want, maybe the user interface, for example, where we'd want more hands-on approach and with a little bit more eye from a strategic perspective of a skilled linguist. And so we definitely want them to have the tools available to them, but then at the same time be able to review it and make decisions themselves. On the other hand, for example, Brave's website is really massive. We have a lot of content on our website, and scaling the website without AI is not really cost effective. So that's an area that we've really seen AI excel for us, is basically helping it to or helping us to scale our long form content, where we can basically design a prompt for a given language, use that prompt, and effectively kind of build it into the workflow that way. And so we can have a human review still, and they can still go through and check everything. But for some of that content, it's not as necessary to be hands-on as it would be for a paywall in the user interface, for example.
Since everybody at your size is probably looking for this type of an implementation, do you have any advice to give as far as pitfalls that teams might face when introducing AI into localization, and maybe how they can avoid them, since you've already gone that path?
Yeah, I'd say we're definitely still learning, like I think most companies are. I think some of the challenges and pitfalls, though, I think there's a tendency of in the tech world to think that these solutions are just out of the box. You just open up the AI, API key or something, you attach it to your system and workflow, and then you just let it go. I would say that that's probably not a very good approach, and you're going to have some issues with that, and just to say the least. And so I think what you really need to hone in on from the beginning is building guardrails around your AI flow. So for example, whatever content you want to work on, make sure that the AI tool is limited to a very specific space or what you want it to work on. Have a really good glossary, style guide, any kind of context of that sort in place. But then also in your prompt engineering, make sure that the prompts are tailored to whatever type of workflow that you're working on. It could be as specific as a type of file, for example, whether it's a JSON file, a Markdown file, an XLIF file. Those are things that could get really specific with a prompt. But beyond that, in general, is just making sure that the considerations and the tone of voice and the all of these different things that you're using with an AI model are accurate and going to give you the best result. Because what I think would happen a lot when people use an out-of-a-box solution is they just trust this LLM model to do the best content. And although the translations may be somewhat okay, whatever we define okay as, right, with the whole quality approach, but you're going to have a lot of inconsistency across the product. And then it's going to be, it might be jumping from formal to informal. It might be jumping from, using a different word, glossary word in different parts of the app. And the problem is that kind of diminishes the effectiveness of using AI and LLM models in your workflows, because what happens in that case is that you end up spending a lot more money to do reviews with humans, and then that kind of counteracts the savings and benefits that companies might get, and even the speed, really, that companies might get from leveraging LLMs for their workflow. So those are a couple of things that come to mind.
I was just going to ask you about the speed, because you've touched upon the budgetary benefits of being able to work with LLMs. What changes have you seen in your project timelines at Brave?
Yeah, I think the interesting thing, obviously, about LLMs is that if you have them automated in your workflow, or if you have them set up in a way that it's a quick access point, like for example, the way Crowdin works with AI APIs, and so having those set up, it can almost be instantaneous in the sense that your production can go from empty content to filled content almost immediately if you have it as part of the automated workflow. And so we've definitely seen workflows go, especially when we have larger projects for turnaround times with our web. It can be very quick, where we turn around content within 1 or 2 days, where it's just immediately done, but then there's a human review cycle or something that gives us a relatively quick turnaround. Whereas before, it might have taken up to a week sometimes for certain languages, because Brave, like many other global companies, has to deal with we have roughly over 50 languages in our product, and it depends on the platform. But when you go to when you start localizing into that many languages, particularly for kind of a global audience, you have challenges logistically with turnaround times and things like that, where you might not be able to consistently get every single language done every single day because of holidays, because of festivals, because of current events. There's all kinds of things that may happen in that pipeline. So it definitely has helped us in that way. And I'd say in terms of timeline, it can definitely reduce timeline over time for certain types of content when the workflow is optimized.
Yeah, I love talking to product managers like yourself nowadays, because they're the ones on the front lines implementing these AI solutions. And so you're probably in the best position to gauge or to have an idea of where things are going for the future. What's your vision for AI's role in localization in the next 3-5 years? Do you have any particular novel insights that we can take away from you in this regard?
Yeah, I'll share my opinion, I think, which is I feel, in watching the market, I think we all, in the tech space, obviously, if we look at the last 10, 15 years of just the tech world in general, it's pretty much like a hockey stick in terms of new technology and new advancements and everything. And obviously, we go back 10 years ago to machine translation, and just going from traditional approaches to translation memory. Then you had DeepL, and you had some of these other contenders on the market. And then all of a sudden, a few years ago, when LLMs really started to take off, we started seeing, all this excitement around the space. I think there's a couple of things here to consider. So one of them is, it's more of a question, is that are LLMs going to be capable of taking care of all languages in the same way that they might take care of languages with a significant amount of data. So, for example, there might be inconsistencies with the training models. For example, the difference between maybe Spanish and Hindi, for example. I don't know, anything like just pick two languages like that. There's probably going to be inconsistencies moving forward, and I don't personally think at the moment that LLMs are qualified enough to do all languages very well. I think they can do some languages pretty good, but I don't think they can do all languages great. That's one thing. Another thing, though, is I think instead of a full replacement, I know a lot of people are excited about this, AI world and that it's going to reduce workforce and all that kind of stuff. That's a controversial topic, first of all, but I think second of all, I think AI is not necessarily going to replace people per se. I think it's going to create specialists. So basically, people who are able to use the tools and leverage the tools to be much more efficient and highly specific in their training field. So, for example, take a linguist, like a German language specialist, a localization specialist, and I think that they're going to become a master of the craft in the sense that, or at least the people who are in the top percentage of the workforce are going to become masters in their craft of using and leveraging AI tools, machine translation, any other kinds of technology to basically craft content for an entire company. So it might not be, a team of linguists working for something, but it might be one or two linguists, and they basically have this structure that they built around scaling content for one particular language, and they're kind of like the gatekeepers of this language. And I think with the companies that care about quality and about localization, I think we'll see more and more of that because I think it just makes sense. I think that the
Are you
full replacement.
referencing content creation in the language itself without going over a source language? Am I detecting that correctly, or that's not necessarily what you were thinking about?
Well, I'm talking about more, a little bit of that, yes, like a little bit of content creation in native language. I think that's something that definitely can happen. But I think in addition to that is the concept of taking, an entire company. I mean, just pick a really massive company, right? Like Brave is a very large company now. We've just crossed 100 million users, so we're definitely contending with some of the top players on the market. But you can take any company that's got north of 100 million users, and you can think about the amount of content that they might actually need to be localizing if you take into account their website, their apps, their portfolio products, their stores, everything. Just take all that content in. And for some companies, that can be millions of words a year. And when you think about that, the traditional model of paying per word is probably gone. It's probably out the window at this point, I think. But if you look at the idea of like, can you still channel that through specialists in a more efficient way? And I think that's what I'm talking about more, is that you're going to look at this kind of funnel of condensation. It's going to go through one person or a smaller team of people, and they're going to be basically experts and specialists in writing prompts for their language and specializing in their content flows and everything. And it might include, to your question, it might include content generation in their own language but that also depends on how companies are structured. If companies have the ability to allow localized content, for example, if they have a blog that can be just for German or a blog that can be just for Japanese, then that's great. But some companies don't have that. A lot of companies still follow a traditional model of English to XYZ languages. And so it's usually one to many versus free, content generation. And that's mostly because of infrastructure more than anything else. I think a lot of company and safeguarding, I guess, the brand in a way, because I think when you get too much localization in the sense that every single market is doing something different, it depends on, a supermarket chain might be able to do that because they need local products and they need things like that. But then like a product like an app that does the same thing in every country, that might get complicated. I don't know. There's a lot of nuances in this that we could probably have a whole conversation about. But I think that's kind of what I'm getting at is I think, yeah.
I want to delve in a little bit more into your team building skills, because you already alluded to the fact that you're a large organization. I think you're overseeing teams of 100 plus across 20 countries. And I think you said 50 languages or so. Was that? Yeah. So That's a sizable effort. You must be a great project manager. How do you structure and scale that kind of endeavor effectively?
Yeah, I think I can talk about it from the jobs and the organizations that I've worked with, but I think there's also some like general keys and things like this that it depends on the company structure, it depends on the budget, it depends on a lot of factors in general as we know. But in my experience, like working with both Brave and Tinder, for example, um, it we had, I'll talk about Tinder and then I'll talk about Brave. I think they're similar but different in the way that I've structured things. But so at Tinder we had in-market teams, and then we also had I built a team of language managers. So we had basically 15 language managers across the world in our top strategic markets. And then there were in-market teams that basically mirrored the language managers. So they were kind of a de facto person between the teams. And then the other part is obviously vendor relationships. So we had, LSPs and we had linguists for each of those. So I think the thing that you have to start with when you're answering this question is like, who are the stakeholders and what is the strategy of the company, right? And so whenever it came to Tinder, we had in-market teams and we had HQ. And we also so we had basically, if we think about that, we were delivering on a few different areas. We were delivering on HQ content, which was like the UI of the app, the website, things like that, which is kind of like a rolling nonstop wheel. But then we had customized things like marketing campaigns and local brand campaigns, et cetera, that were happening in market. And so this was an interesting thing. And to solve for that, what I did was I said, we need a go-between, which is not part of the vendor, which is basically a linguist, a language manager, who's a specialist, who's going to be able to communicate with HQ, who's going to communicate with the in-market team, and they're going to be able to be the leader and the guide in their own language. And so when you pick a language with that person, I also enabled them to be basically the lead on their linguists through the vendor. So for example, in that case, we had an external LSP, and that LSP had 2 linguists per language. So the language managers were basically their manager, and then the language managers were going between the HQ and the in-market teams. And so that kind of helps us to reduce the amount of people who are contacting, on a daily basis in the sense of that, but it also helps to decentralize the teams in the way that, we're giving autonomy to the people who should have the final say in things. Like, for example, I should not be making any linguistic decisions for Bulgarian or for Russian or something like that. I mean, I might know a few words here and there, but I am not a linguistic authority in those languages, and I don't want to be. And I can't multiply that by 50 to begin with. It's just not something that I can scale. So I like doing that way, and I've basically done something very similar at Brave in that, we have a similar structure. We have a position that's a go-between position, that I call, actually, it's kind of a 2.0 of Tinder, which I'm probably going to write about soon. But it's called a language growth manager. So a language growth manager is basically a 2.0 version of a language manager, to kind of fit the needs of 2025 versus the needs of 2017, because the industry has changed so much. And so I go that approach, and they're basically the go-between for the vendor and for the in-market teams or wherever we're at. But at the same time, we are also introducing the new tools of the game, which is like AI and other things, which are another component. But even then, that's like something that, again, I can't manage 50 prompt engineer messages for different languages because I'm just not, I don't have enough linguistic knowledge in every single language to be able to do that effectively. So for me to do that, I'm basically just kind of offload some of that to other people. And in terms of just keeping that wheel going, I think you have to build a culture around the vision and the strategy of the company. You have to hire good people, and then you have to let them do good work. And then I think when it comes to myself, I think meeting with those people regularly, like at Tinder, for example, we'd have like a weekly sync with the different groups. So I'd have like an APAC meeting and a Europe meeting or Europe LATAM meeting. Get in touch with everyone. I'd say, what's the questions? What are we working on? Anybody have any roadblocks that I can help with? And then like these are the priorities of the week, and then let's move on from there. So it was kind of like a flywheel of getting things out at speed, but then also making sure that there's enough autonomy to work on other initiatives, growth projects, anything like that. So that's kind of where I've been with team building.
Am I correct to extrapolate that since you're calling them language growth managers, that their KPIs lie beyond just the linguistic and they're really focused on new client acquirement or retention? Is that correct?
To an extent, yeah. So basically, it's it depends on whether someone's full-time or freelance or whatever. So you can only give strict KPIs to, generally what someone would be able to control within the breadth of their work. But what I do focus on, that you picked up on, is that I focus on someone who's not just looking at pure translation, but is actually someone who's looking at a growth mindset of, for example, the way that I explain it and the way that I'm writing about it is basically a CEO of their language, in the sense that let's say, pick a language, right? I'm the Spanish language manager. My goal is to get this product to grow with Spanish language users. And that's like, what can I do to make that happen? And so I go to people and I say, like, what ideas do you have? What are the thoughts? What are the whatever? And so you basically get this idea where, a linguist has now become another thinker on the team. You're not just giving them translation projects and saying, hey, what is this? I'm saying, you live in Spain. What are your thoughts on the Spanish market? How do you feel like we can grow? How do you feel like we can get more people to see the product? Or what are some areas for improvement? Or what are the perceptions with competitors in your market? Getting people to look at things more three-dimensionally, rather than the traditional model of just like, oh, here's English to Spanish, and that's all we need from you. It's more like a relationship, in terms of they are a part of the team, they're a part of the strategy, they're a part of the growth mindset. And so they're an additional person in the group that's thinking about their market. And so it is like that. And when it comes to KPIs, I do give projects to language growth managers, in the sense of, in the App Store, for example, and saying, like, how can we improve the conversion rate for your language? And I say, what are the ideas that you have? Here's the information that you need. Here's, look at the sentiment in the market, look at the reviews, look at the performance, look at all these metrics, and then say, what is your strategy for improving the conversion rate? What keywords should we be focused on? Going down the list like that. And the same thing with the app side. In the product itself, you can ask a language growth manager to, can you maybe figure out a way to increase the conversion rate on a paywall, for example? You can look at that and say, maybe we need to try a different button. Maybe we need to try a different messaging around that. So I think it's more of a combination role than it's the traditional linguistic of, like, the localization role of just one-to-one language. Because I think for a couple of reasons, just to kind of close it off, I think it's not only boring, I guess, in a way, for a traditional language role of just like, I'm a English to Spanish translator, and they just basically get a task thrown over the fence to them, in the proverbial sense, and they just have to do that and send it back, because it's very transactional, right? They don't actually ever see the end result of that. And I think a lot of linguists for a long time have been very hungry about seeing things through, because linguists are artistic people. They're very creative. They're very hands-on. They love to see the outcome of their work. They love to see the product of their stuff. But a lot of times, historically, it just hasn't been the case in our industry, right? I mean, linguists have been, here, just do this to this. They've been, like, kind of marginalized.
They have been kept in their lane, and it's so refreshing to hear you talk about that. I think so often, especially nowadays, we're talking about the diminishing role of the linguist, and I think there's new opportunities with the technologies that we have for the linguist to be involved in a much broader way. We have talked a little bit about speed already, but there's another aspect, I think, that is near and dear to the localization field. We've always been focused on localization. Now we're able to personalize in a much more profound way, I think. What does hyper-localization mean to you in the context of Brave's global growth?
Yeah, hyper-localization is a fun topic. I've done some talks about it before, and I think it's an interesting area, because I think it goes beyond the nuance of just this is in English, now it's in Japanese. I think it's just like the old thing about like localizing jokes, for example. There's this whole concept of like, or idioms, like if you just localize like, I don't know, pick an idiom. If you go like, what is it? To do two tasks at the same time. It's like to kill two birds with one stone. But in Russian, I think it's like to shoot two rabbits with one bullet. And then I think in Korean, it's like, what is it in Korean? It's like moving stones or something. I forget exactly what it is, but
My
it's something like
Korean is
stones.
non-existent, so I
Yeah.
can't help you there. You're on your own. I'm sorry.
There's something with, I forget exactly what it is, but it's like moving stones, I believe, or something like that. But anyway, um, the the point of that is that's the difference between just a word for word translation, right, and a localization. I think when it comes to this hyper localization of things, it's that the ultimate goal when I have a localization program that I'm standing up is that if all things permitting, you want the product to look and feel like it was written and made for a local. You want it to feel as local as possible. You do not want someone, especially not in Japan, especially not in a lot of East Asian markets, actually. You don't want them to open it up and say, "Oh, this is kind of funny. It sounds like a foreign product trying to explain a concept to me." And that's usually what happens, right? That's what most companies end up doing. You actually want it natively written, so you need to have the thing. I guess the underlying thing of what we're talking about with hyperlocalization, though, is infrastructure needs to be there to be able to do hyperlocalization. So when it comes to like UI elements, that's a little complicated because you can't really change the strings if you're trying to use a scalable system like as in Crowdin, like using that to basically work through your content. It's really difficult to have different custom segments for every single market. It just doesn't work that way, unfortunately. However, you can give autonomy to change the wording a little bit in the sense that you're changing the sentiment. You can give a little bit of that guidance on, if something doesn't make sense, don't just translate it word for word, make it kind of a little bit more robust or more verbose. I think that's some of the things that can be done on the UI sense. When it comes to the stores in general, I think you can look at a couple things, right? So for example, if you look at the stores, you can localize your screenshots or something like that, or your keywords, whatever. And that's one thing. But then you can also think about like, what are the important factors in every single market? And like, can you list those things out in a way that makes sense for you to localize and then actually change the messaging a little bit or the order of the messaging to make it more appealing to a specific market? That's kind of a way to do that for top markets. But then when it comes to other areas, like you're asking specifically to Brave, I think I wouldn't say we've perfected it yet, but we have our search engine is a very popular alternative to Google, and we've been growing a lot in the recent years, really. But it's in that what we have, is personalization is a theme, right? Because in search, it's an interesting one in the privacy world, though, because there is no personal information about a user. It doesn't exist, and so the personalization of you is more based on the information maybe that you're searching or something. And I don't mean that specifically is how it works. I'm just saying that's the concept of like, how do you get the right information in front of people in that sense? And I think that's becoming more and more relevant in the sense of like, when you're online, are you getting effectively what you're looking for? Are you getting the experience that you were looking for? That I don't know about yourself, but I know myself in the last couple of years that I found, especially, and I'm not saying this because I work at Brave, but I am saying this because it's been an interesting trend, is that when you if you went like a few years ago to Google, I noticed a few years ago before I started working at Brave, actually, just how bad the experience was getting. I don't know if other
I
people
was
have
just
noticed, but
going to
like for
ask
me,
you if I can interrupt you rudely, because this is an area I'm particularly interested in, and now I'm really interested in having your opinion about this as well. My search, I don't know about your search habits, but my search habits have changed completely, and I think that search habits of a lot of people are changing because of the way we are now we can converse with LLMs, and that's a whole different way of thinking and looking things up, much more intuitive. So how is that affecting your localization efforts and your general search strategies as such?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question because it's very relevant to today, obviously. I mean, we have new products like at Brave that are very interesting and very personalized. So for example, we have Ask Brave, which was just launched recently. And on Ask Brave, it's a full conversation when you're searching. So if you type what is Crowdin, and then it tells you what is Crowdin, you're like, oh, give me some of the what are some of the selling points of Crowdin? And then the LM model is going to continue having that conversation with you. And it's just like, as other LLMs may work, but it's a personalized search experience. And then you can ask for live context because basically, it's able to give you links or give you things like that. So it's actually, I think it's a lot more effective way to use the internet and to gather information than we previously done. Because, if you look at just the spam that was happening in the last couple of years with like SEO spam and all this kind of stuff, it was getting outrageous where you just go to a search and then you couldn't actually find legitimate information because it was just stack rank spam from all these big companies for any topic that you would look up. And it's changed. It's changing now, which I think is a great thing. And I think when it comes to not only the conversation side of it, but just the informational side of it, I think it's important for all companies to have their internet, like their presence on the internet. They need to make sure that the content that's out there for their company is giving good information. Not only for, it should be up to date, it should be accurate, it should be timely, it should be updated. I mean, whether it's your website yourself, whether it's your presence, like your Wikipedia pages and your other content, your Reddit content, all these areas where these LLM models are getting a lot of their training from. It's really important to have that information locked down because if you don't, what ends up happening is that there can be some false information about a company or about something specific, and what happens is the LLMs get trained on that, and then it may start introducing that into to results, and then what happens is it can really spiral for your business because it can be important questions like what is the cost of whatever Crowdin, or what is the cost of this, and one wrong piece of information can make it look like it's completely unattainable for anyone, and then people stop using it or something because they're like, oh, that's just bad information. And so that's something to keep in mind. I think it's a really important topic for all companies. And to the point of our conversation right now, that's multiplied by every single language that you work in. So it's not just a factor of, are we good enough in English and that's our thing? No, I mean, you have to actually check this in every single language. You need to make sure that Wikipedia pages are good in French and they're good in Hindi and they're good, it's those things. And obviously, as a company, you're not updating those things, but you need to make sure the right information is out there so that when people are updating them, they have the right information in front of them. So, for example, if you have links to your website for English, but then you don't have them for Hindi, then that's just a conversation for anyone in those languages to make up on their own. And then the public who's updating Wiki, then they're going to make their own information up. And then the LLMs might get trained with poor information. So there's a lot of things that, companies need to keep in mind with, and it's challenging right now. And that's why I think you need a good team. We talked about team earlier, and I think it's important to focus on that. And I think some companies may see the promise of AI, they get really excited about it and think it might be a reduction of workforce or anything. And I would caution any managers and executives thinking that it's just a willy-nilly kind of replacement for all. I would actually challenge them to.
It's an opportunity for growth, much more, I think, than an opportunity to reduce things. Andy, we are 3 minutes over already, and I knew this is going to happen. You're going to have to come on sometime soon again to talk about the other questions that I prepared for you, because we had no problem filling this space with just half of my questions, and I have a lot of good ones left. Let's do one last one, be really naughty, and go over a couple more minutes. How do you prioritize locales based on ASO potential versus translation complexity? That's one thing that I wanted to part with here this morning.
Yeah, so the app stores are an interesting space, and I don't actually hear a lot of localization programs talk about them, which is interesting because it's such a critical part of almost all mobile apps. I would say that 99% of your mobile users have to go through the app store. It's like literally the port of entry for everyone, and so a lot of companies, for some reason, don't focus on them that much. But it's an odd thing for me. But anyway, how do you prioritize? I think it really matters when you look at your markets and you look around at what you have. You have to really think about where are we getting the most traffic, where are we getting the most views, where are we ranking really well for keywords, and then where are we not? Because when you see that you're not ranking well, maybe you have mismatched keywords. Maybe your keywords are not aligned with the brand. And then when it comes to the localization, the locales, etc., and performance, you have to really look at. You can almost look at the analysis on your conversion rates across the markets and see if maybe one market like I don't know. Pick a market. It can be Russian, it could be Chinese, whatever, where maybe it's not performing as good as other markets, and then you kind of see an opportunity for improvement. And I think that you have to look at it from a few different angles. So you can look at it from the angle of optimizing from start to 0 to 100, which is we don't have anything, but we want it all. So let's do a V1. But then once you get the V1 out there, you have to kind of look at it and optimize and say, well, now that we have all these out, we've launched all these languages, how do we go back and kind of review and figure out where things need to be improved and whatever. And so, the App Store itself from Apple has 38 languages. So that has a pretty decent amount, but it's usually the core business languages for tech companies. And then you have the Google Play Store, which the last time I counted, I don't know exactly how it is today, but they have more like 85 languages that they allow. And in that, there's a lot of hyper-localization that goes even by country sometimes, like by language and country locale. But they also operate very differently because the App Store is country specific and language is a second tier, whereas the Play Store is actually language specific first rather than country. And so they work very differently in terms of how they're viewed by the user. And these are important considerations to make when companies are using, optimizing their their App Store flows.
Awesome.
And so,
Thank you
yeah.
so very much for being so gracious with your time today. You got to come back one of these days. So we're putting you on the schedule right away, maybe.
Sounds
Andy, thank you for sharing your insights, and we look forward to running into you soon in person again. I missed you at Loc World.
Yep.
On to the next conference for me at Taos, but in the spring, I hope to encounter you someplace around the United States. Thank you for joining us.
That sounds great. Thanks for having me.
Well, folks, that's a wrap on today's episode of the Agile Localization Podcast by Crowdin. We hope you found it as insightful as we did. If you enjoyed today's conversation and want to learn more about how leading companies are managing their multilingual content efficiently, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any upcoming episodes. Thank you for tuning in. For more resources on how to streamline your localization process, visit crowdin.com. See you next time.